This is Steve Zeltzer with Pacifica, Capitalism, Race, and Democracy. The struggle over Palestine and the situation of the Palestinians has become an international issue for working people all over the world. And one of the issues that's taken place is that there's a campaign internationally to silence supporters of the Palestine struggle who are defending their rights and against the attacks that they're facing. And also, there's an effort to use the union bureaucracy and the courts to shut people down, as well as a political campaign of doxing or attacking people to get them fired from their jobs and that kind of thing. And today we're talking with Mime Rosenberg. She's one of the founders of Building Bridges, a show in WBAI in New York, which is syndicated nationally and is an important labor show. And she also is a lawyer, and she's a member of UAW 2325 issue, the Association of Legal Aid. And for many years, this local has taken positions, political positions around South Africa, as have many unions and the AFL-CIO, for a boycott of South Africa and the apartheid regime in South Africa. But it seems that now an effort is being made to shut down the right of the members of this local to have a say on the question of the attack on the Palestinians, the attack on their democratic rights, the attack on their human rights, and the effort to kick them out of the Gaza and kick them out of Israel. So welcome to our show, Mime.
Well, thank you. It's good to be with you.
So Mime, why don't you talk a bit about your local? You represent legal aid attorneys in New York and the history of your local, because your local, as I said, has taken positions previously on political issues.
Well, first of all, I've worked for the Legal Aid Society in its civil division, which is committed to around housing, public benefits, disability rights, and immigration issues, among other things, to defend the indigent who cannot afford lawyers. We are also the largest and oldest public defender in the criminal venue in the country. We are comprise a union which is the UAW Workers Local 2325, the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, a component part of the United Automobile Workers, and we're roughly 2,700 legal and social service workers in the greater New York City area. And we introduced a resolution which is not unusual. We try to be socially conscious and to use our bully pulpit, if you will, which some of us think is one of the functions of unions, to advocate for social justice issues, as well as, of course, to get the best contracts and wage and benefit packages for our membership, and to adequately represent them on various grievances. In any event, in accordance with the kind of work that we do, which is work that is kind of morally grounded, as well as for those who are politically, generally the downtrodden of our societies, we also represent a good number of people of Arab ancestry, and in the Brooklyn office where I'm based, no small number of people who are from Yemen, from Egypt, and definitely Palestinian, and who have been pushed here in exile, in effect. So our client base in many aspects is Palestinian, as I said, people who have suffered from Islamophobia, anti-Muslim racism. And certainly the individual members of the union are committed to this kind of work because they do have a moral compass and because they are looking to kind of level the playing field in the legal arena for equal rights and justice. Having said that, again, it's not unfamiliar for our union to take or attempt to take political stances. And a number of people, authored a resolution that called for an immediate ceasefire in Israel and an end to Israeli apartheid and the occupation and blockade of Palestinian land, sea, and air by Israeli military forces. And it announces that the ALAA stands for Human Rights and Against Apartheid, Ethnic Cleansing, and Genocide. And that was in response, of course, to, at this juncture, the actions that Israel took on subsequent to the October 7th efforts of a number of organizations to break out of, if you will, and to resist being herded into and the conditions they were subject to in nothing more than a concentration camp. So in any event, the resolution was introduced, and there was some immediate debate as to whether or not the delegates in individual shops get to vote up or down on it. And most of us, and that's kind of the character and quality of our union, felt that it was democratic and imperative as an educative process for the membership as a whole to vote on what we understood was a controversial issue. It was certainly controversial for some number of the membership that hold fast and true to Zionist principles. And I should say that historically, in the 38 years that I've been in this union, any discussion around the rights and issues of the Palestinian people have been foreclosed to us. And what I mean by that is that when we sought to have forums in our workplaces, not connected with the union and so on, but just general forums to air the issue when there was a particular catastrophe that would happen, we were generally precluded from doing so by management, etc., always suggesting that we were creating a hostile work environment and that any discussion of the issue of Palestine, whether it's bringing in a major scholar such as Rashid Khalidi from Columbia University, who occupies the Edward Said Chair, and is the head of Middle East studies there, to bring him in to discuss his book, The 100-Year War Against Palestine, was viewed as a hostile act and was tantamount to creating an atmosphere of really vapid and scurrilous anti-Semitism. So there's generally, and again, in the 38 years that I've been there, every effort to, in our job sites, have a meaningful discussion around the issues of Palestine. And again, we have no small number of attorneys and social worker and administrative staff that are of Arab ancestry and who are Palestinian. Doesn't matter. Their hurt and their concerns are generally disregarded in an organization that is liberal and prescribes to receive equal rights and justice and due process. So there's a duality to where we're going here. So there was the resolution that was authored, and the debate was whether or not our delegates should vote on it, or whether or not, as people like myself advocated, all the membership should vote on it, wherever that may take us. One, because it's democratic, and we need to continue to push for democracy within the confines of our union structure and not a hierarchy. And we have a new leadership in the UAW, so that becomes very important to us to implement a broader system of democracy in our own locals. So we wanted the entire membership to be able to vote on this very critical issue. And we have our own And that was agreed to, so that the resolution as proposed would be voted up or down. How much more democratic can you get? There was another reason that we wanted all the membership, some of us, to vote on it, aside from the issue of union democracy, and that is because we hope that it would stimulate discourse and education to agitate and organize for support for the Palestinians' rights. That is when management kind of came into the fray in some ways, saying that under no condition during union time or otherwise in our workplaces could we have that kind of discussion. We'll get back to that in a moment and why they called an emergency meeting to prevent us from doing that. But to go back to the union, we have our own union email list, and needless to say, there was a lot of discourse, as there should be. And I welcome that back and forth about whether or not people should vote to approve the resolution or not. And again, the gist of the resolution was really to stand for human rights and against apartheid, ethnic cleansing, and genocide, and for an immediate ceasefire in Israel and an end to Israeli apartheid and the occupation and blockade of Palestine by land and sea. It was pretty pro forma, but strong and concerned in its intent. We then went back and forth on our email list, our union email list, with lots of strong feelings in many different ways. Fine. The next thing that we know is there was an article in the New York Post, which was deriding the Legal Aid Society as a hotbed of anti-Semitic venom, creating miserable and hostile work environments, and then taking it a step further by suggesting that this anti-Semitic venue of the 2,700 legal and social workers and so on, who receive city contracts and some amount of philanthropic funding, there should be a question as to whether or not the city coffers should continue to fund the Legal Aid Society as public defenders and give them the contracts. This was, there was clearly a dual purpose in the Post. The problem and the sad thing is that where the Post got this from is union members who took personal emails that were open and available to all and jerry-picked particular ones of them and forwarded those to the Post. And needless to say, there were some strident voices, as there might be. So the Post used this as a way of attacking the Legal Aid Society. So where do we go from there? The next thing that happened was these very same people who deliberately and flagrantly to really destroy the institution, among other things, as well as violated every kind of principle of democratic discourse within the union and so on, filed suit against the union in Mineola, Long Island, Nassau County, in federal court. And they filed suit to get a TRO to prevent the resolution from being sent to and voted on by the membership. And I am flabbergasted as a lawyer, but the fact of the matter is that they did get the temporary restraining order, which is very serious because it also means and of course, it named as plaintiffs our union officers and so on, and revealed again confidential and private discourses of people. The thrust of the TRO was based on it. The TRO was to prevent us from circulating the resolution for people to vote on. The alleged claim to do that was that the resolution stimulated discourses that created, again, a hostile work environment and was virulently anti-Semitic. And it's mind-boggling to me that on the facts of a union resolution, which could be democratically voted on and which everybody could have their say, would allow or lead to a federal judge actually censoring, if you will, issuing a temporary restraining order to prevent the circulation of a democratic resolution from a private entity, i.e. our union. So that's kind of where we stand. And I just want to add one piece. That was then followed by an emergency meeting called by management, who weighed in, who told us that what was happening was that some of the white shoe law firms and or funders that were part of our board had given some indication that they would withdraw funding again in response to the virulent anti-Semitism that was circulating and allowed to proliferate in the various offices of the Legal Aid Society. And we were incredibly admonished, almost to the point of saying, if I see a poster hanging up in your office, it must come down. But essentially, our speech was truncated. People were threatened by Twyla Carter, who is the attorney in chief of the Legal Aid Society, whose commentaries to us were abysmal. And of course, this was during a Zoom conference where each and every one of us was muted, so that there was the ability to respond in any way, and also to was essentially nil or negated and vitiated by the fact that at best you could make a 2-sentence response in a chat room. So the effort to chill our speech is now a full court press from management, from some of our own members who have used the federal court system against our union as a mechanism for speech. And that's enormously concerning, in part of, no doubt, what is a serious kind of McCarthyistic rise to prevent the issues of and rights of the Palestinian people from being adjudicated in public opinion and being supported. And the cry of anti-Semitism is really the calling card to silence people, which we certainly see in the press daily, whether it's the New York Post or certainly CNN and MSNBC. And that's where we are. So we continue as a union. We are under the auspices of a court. We are also, as individuals in terms of our jobs, under some threat from management. And the question becomes, how do we continue to deliberate on this issue? Obviously, we will file, our union will file responding papers, but we are still under an injunction not to deal with the Palestinian issue, but we will also continue to meet and think about how we can represent and present the issues which we feel is a moral imperative, and particularly given the kinds of work that we do. And you know, I can say just additionally, that the commentary of a attorney-in-chief of the Legal Aid Society, who should be standing proudly and affirmatively with the membership for having the dignity, regardless of how it comes out, to deliberate on these issues of grave importance in the world community, but as part of the work that we do. Social justice issues are what drive people to do this kind of work. And the ethics and morality of preventing and responding to genocides, and particularly that are aided and abetted with US tax dollars and diplomacy. These are the values that we presumably internalize to do our work for the populations that we represent.
And the New York Post is not, it's not unusual because they have been targeting students. They targeted CUNY and launched attacks saying that the funding should be cut. It seems like they have a coordinated campaign going to threaten and coerce and intimidate supporters of the Palestinian people and against the actions of the Zionists. Now, one of the things that they argued in their injunctive relief was that the statement "from the river to the sea" was made, and that in itself was anti-Semitic. And now from the river to the sea, there are members of the Israeli government who believe that that is their position, that all belongs to Israel, to the Zionists, that actually that whole area belongs to Israel as a matter of their natural rights to that land. But the fact that a court now has prevented temporarily the rights of union members to even discuss this issue, is that a threat not just to your local and the UAW, but to working people and unions throughout the United States, that a court can say what you can and cannot discuss?
Absolutely. And I just want to say that, in conjunction with the court, which gave really no reasoning whatsoever for its summary decision on the injunction, I just want to again mention that Thwyla Carter, our manager, had called the resolution selfish and privileged because we were entirely unconcerned about what our funding apparatus would think. In addition, she suggested that the statement and the resolution was coded anti-Semitic language and thinly veiled calls for the destruction of the state of Israel. This is the general mantra that is manufactured whenever anybody responds antagonistically to the Zionist apparatus and ideology that went into the formation of the state of Israel and now is the guiding practice and policies that have taken the form of an apartheid structure to control the Palestinian people, and indeed to really begin further the process of the complete Judaization of all of the historic landmass of Palestine. And any resistance to that effort then results in the elimination of the population. And frankly, I absolutely believe that this is just my personal opinions after studying the history from 48 forward and through the bombardment of Gaza in 2014 and so on, that the effort now is really the final solution for the state. And then I will more specifically answer your question, but I think it needs to be said that the genocide that is unfolding is part of a Holocaust that has been unfolding against all of the peoples of Palestine. And certainly we see that by the increased killings from armed militias, which is what the settler movement is in the West Bank. We didn't even have that kind of extensive discourse, although we hope to at some point. But the idea that now is this well-orchestrated campaign to say that every critique of Zionism is coded anti-Semitic language and thinly veiled calls for the destruction of the state of Israel is the mantra of the New York Post. It is the mantra that has been fed to CNN, to MSNBC, and virtually all media. The question that you specifically asked, which is the harnessing the censorship of speech and what it portends by virtue of raising a resolution in support of Palestinian human rights and existence is a terrifying sign, both of a growing McCarthyism, but as a mechanism to both silence us and to do what they are doing with the Palestinian people, which is to permanently silence people. And I think it is part of, and we are all Gazans in that sense politically, because if we are shut up, if we are prevented from taking up this cause, if we are subsumed by legal tenet, etc., not to be able to represent on a politically imperative issue, then we have curtailed our voice and curtailed any resistance to what Zionism is part of. And that is a really galloping fascism in the world community that would subsume our working class organizations, certainly our unions, and the voice of working class people in any context. So this has great implications. And certainly, as far as I'm concerned and understood it, it is by far, and it is the working class that has been the most consistent and reliable source for social change and for equal rights and justice and democracy within a society. So this particular TRO from federal court stands as a way of curtailing the democratic rights and really, as far as I'm concerned, advancing fascist ideology and fascist action in this country. And certainly, Steve, you must also know that the Starbucks Workers Union, which issued a statement in support of Palestine. The very same union will not be recognized for any rights or benefits contractually by its management, did suddenly recognize them by the management suing the Starbucks Workers Union to prevent them from further disseminating their statement in support of Palestinian rights, which was a resolution similar to that which ushered forth from a grouping of members within the Legal Aid Society, or I should say within the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys.
And the issue of action by unions, I know the ILWU took action to boycott cargo to Israel. It shut down the Zim lines on the West Coast as a result of that solidarity action of the longshoremen. But at the same time, in the UAW, UAW 2865, the graduate students actually had a democratic vote discussion among the entire membership, voted for a position of boycott and support for the Palestinian people. And the UAW leadership at that time nullified it, saying that it would affect UAW members who were making armaments, military weapons for Israel, and therefore they could not take that position. And this comes at the same time that the UAW was forced to sell its Israeli bonds by an action of Arab workers, Arab American workers in Detroit, who marched to demand that the bonds be sold, and also by the struggle against apartheid, South Africa, when the UAW, and in fact, the entire AFL-CIO supported the boycott of South Africa against the apartheid regime. The AFL-CIO, first of all, is there an effort being made to get the UAW as well to support your action to defend your right to discuss and take action on this issue, since it affects not just your local, but the entire labor movement? And second of all, the UAW and the AFL-CIO itself has been silent about Palestine and the genocide that's going on of the Palestinians. So how do you see this being taken up within the labor movement as a whole? Because it seems that this issue is not just about your local, but the democratic rights of workers throughout the United States and unions to have any debate and discussion on these issues.
Well, one of the things that I think that we have to do is grow the organization Labor for Palestine, which seeks to go across union line and industry line to bring as many people together as possible so that people are not just fending for themselves and also can take up more effectively the issues of the labor federations, such as the AFL-CIO, which we already had one demonstration against, to get them to take up the cause and the issue of the downtrodden, of the despised, of the hurt, and those who actually are in the midst of a genocide, i.e. the Palestinian people. So I think we have to build those organizations. And we at the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys seeking an education campaign of our membership and trying to figure out ways that we can continue to issue statements, notwithstanding the fact that we are under some form of injunctive relief. And I must say that our Bronx Defenders Union was particularly remarkable. They did issue a public statement that said that they do not consent to Israel's genocidal rhetoric and actions against the Palestinian people, and we do not consent to U.S. political support for this genocide. And I would quote further, we urge all people of good conscience who claim to be committed to the abolition of the prison industrial complex, to migrant rights, to housing justice for all, to ending the family regulation system, to join us in publicly condemning the atrocities of Israel and defending the Palestinian people from ethnic cleansing and genocide. They were quite heroic in this, and they are under some threat as to their individual employment as a result of doing this. So I think the answer, Steve, is part of what you've always been part of, which is to try to organize now our unions into organizations like Labor for Palestine and the like, so that we have more strength. And as to taking the issues up with the broader efforts of the UAW, bringing it to Sean Fain, etc., that is something that we are contemplating and need to do, and are in the process of figuring out the process and the methodology of trying to get the broader union on board for this. At this juncture, the only two unions that I know of that have, as big, broad national unions, have issued statements around Palestine, and great courage to them, is the Postal Workers Union under Dynenstein, and also the, aside from the Postal Workers Union, the UE, which is not surprising, which has had an important statement. I do know that the SEIU and Local 1199 has actually disciplined individual staff members who had taken strong positions as staff members on their own, which were reported back through, again, personal emails and public statements, and they were summarily let go. So we have a good deal of work to do two things with our unions, and that is still to educate them to go beyond the imperative of economic and economist-based issues, and to see themselves as political units for worker empowerment, and thus imperative that they take up these issues of great social import in the world community and, frankly, locally, from police violence issues and so on. But we are in the nascent stage of trying to get the backing and legal papers and the like from our parent union to support us. So we've got to organize, and we've got to get these rank and file groups from the UFT, who actually held in New York a demonstration in support of Palestine against the union and against their current leadership, Mulgrave. We've got to form coalitions of progressive union locals and membership to be able to push our broader bodies to take up these social political issues of great world import and for social justice.
And the ideology of Zionism, which is supported by the leadership of the AFL-CIO, is that there should be a Jewish state, that Jews have rights beyond other people in the state of Israel. Now, in the United States, the position of the AFL-CIO is we're for equality for all. And Christian workers should not have more rights than Jewish workers or Muslim workers. Yet, it seems when it comes to Israel and the rights of the Jews, the AFL-CIO has taken a position which is actually in opposition to democratic rights, which is the precept they have in the United States.
Oh, there's no question about it. They also, what they have done is they have for 75 years, they, they have accepted the positioning that a Zionism, or let's start back with that, Judaism is, and Jews are a nation rather than a religion, and accepted the philosophy of Zionism, which did not come out of the Talmud, which did not come out of the religious tenets of Judaism, but is an artificial construct and a nationalist movement to subsume people's land, exploit the labor, and in the classic fashion of all imperialist endeavors. And of course, financed by the Rothschilds and the imperialist instincts and hegemonistic interests of Great Britain and the US. So the AFL-CIO certainly is an organization that has to be retooled from the ground up, and has generally capitulated to the right wing, to imperialist endeavors, in its support of groups like the Histadrut and so on. And of course, we know its activity in facilitating, literally facilitating the coup in Chile and the advent of the Pinochet regime and the mass slaughter, including the death of its duly elected president, Allende. So the AFL has enormous problems and has been supported by and funded by great amounts of money that come from the Zionist, exclusionary, exclusivist, hierarchical elite. But for anybody who is more versed in Judaism, and again, who believes that it is a, and there are many of us that do, who are Jews, Orthodox, and even secular, and so on, who believe that Judaism is a religion. And religions don't establish nations. And Zionism was exactly the opposite. It is a really classic, opportunistic ideology to aid the imperialist endeavors to set up a state and thus dislocate, disenfranchise, and otherwise massacre a restive population of Palestinians who would inevitably resist this. So there has to be the distinction between Zionism and Judaism, and there has to be the important knowledge that what Zionism did is it set up a theocratic state. It set up a religious state. It set up a religious state which is inherently undemocratic. Religious states are exclusive and exclusionary. They are not inclusive, and they are not democratic, and they do not subscribe to civil law tenets and so on. So the AFL-CIO has always aligned itself with that, and the reactionary labor movement and the exclusionary labor movement. And my goodness, the fact that the AFL-CIO could not even respond to the thousands of Palestinian workers throughout the territory of historic Palestine, aka Israel, being expelled and sent back to a war zone that was being carpet bombed, i.e. Gaza, to the concentration camp. Thousands of the Palestinian workers were expelled and exiled again in recent weeks. And where the hell was the voice of the AFL-CIO standing up for those thousands of workers, many of whom were sent to certain death? So the AFL-CIO has been on the wrong side of history, on the wrong side of indeed supporting Jews who had been subject to a Holocaust and degraded and denigrated, and indeed suffer some degree of anti-Semitism in the world community, and particularly with the rise of the alt-right now and the rise of fascism from the Viktor Orbáns and the Trumpites and so on. Where the hell is the AFL-CIO in terms of understanding that it is Zionism that is a destroyer, a national imperialist-based movement, a hegemonistic movement that is destroying the really Talmudic tenets of the Judaic religion. So they are both on the wrong side of history and supporting what is a thoroughly reactionary, exclusivist, and genocidal movement.
And of course, the Zionist, Herzl and the Zionist movement have collaborated, as you say, with imperialist regimes, with the British and the Balfour Agreement to allow Zionists to get land. Also, unknown by most people in the United States and internationally, the Zionists actually collaborated with the Nazis. They invited Eichmann to Palestine to convince him of their idea that Palestine should become a Jewish state, should become Israel. And this collaboration with the Nazis has a racialist content. I mean, the idea that the Germans belong in Germany, the Jews belong in Israel, that theory of nationalism theologically continues today, and the Zionists continue to collaborate with right-wingers around the world in supporting them for the purpose of building their Zionist state. One of the issues is the rise of fascism in the United States, and some have argued that the attack on critics of Zionism, the kind of witch hunt that's going on in the United States, is similar to the witch hunts in the 50s when communists and socialists were silenced, and there was a campaign of terror in the labor movement that led to the destruction of the left wing of the labor movement. They were purged out of the unions. That is the direction that we're going to, or is a danger of, in the United States. What's your view on that, considering there seems to be a coordinated effort to get rid of people who are critical of Israel?
Oh, you said it beautifully, and most importantly, and that is, if anybody understands the history of from the Palmer raids to the House Un-American Activities Committee to the issue of the rise of McCarthyism, in fundamental ways, they were attacks on the labor movement, and they were attacks on people in the labor movement, from the Harry Bridges and the Eugene B. Debs and so on, who were socialist in their orientation, who came out of the communist ideology, which is, what is the communist ideology? It is in the supremacy of the working class. Those who do the work get to make the decisions. So all of these movements have been, and them come out of an attack on the organization of the working class, i.e. the attack on organized labor and labor activists. And people have to understand that. And that is very much what is going on now with these particular efforts to bring the Starbucks Workers Union, the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys into court, and so on. It's part of a McCarthyism, but the McCarthyism, as people should understand, was a decided attack on the left, decided attack on the communist movement, and it has been used to crush what is the ideology that was most empathetic to the justice of for the working class, who indeed are the ones who build and create all the wealth within our society. That may seem about somewhat hackneyed, but that's it. And so the roots of this, and indeed the irony of the damn AFL-CIO, is that they have capitulated, whether it's not responding to the Palestinian workers who are being expelled back to the concentration camp that is Gaza, waiting to be, well, it's already been leveled back to the Stone Age, but where people are virtually waiting to be annihilated, as Benjamin Netanyahu has unceremoniously said, as once we get whatever hostages in quotes back, we will resume full scale to level Gaza and all that are in it. So it is critical to understand this new McCarthyism. It stems from, and it comes from, and it is part of the attack on the organization of the working class, which was the labor movements. And that were the labor movements during the 30s, which had their militant strikes, which certainly had a much more aggressive posture against the bosses, and many of which were led and organized by immigrants who came from social ideology that was of the left and were empathetic and were indeed fellow travelers with the Soviet Union and other entities that were believed in the supremacy in terms of the leadership and the decision-making and government of the working class. So very important, critical point, and it cannot be detached, this kind of McCarthyism. And the fact of the matter is that any of the movements against settler colonialism and the Palestinian resistance, which is its existence, is a movement against settler colonialism. And those movements have always sought to ally themselves with the working class and with the organizations of the working class to free themselves from imperialist, colonialist endeavor in the world. So we have to see these things as joined together, and that this is most definitively an attack as well. The limitations, and that's why I said we're all Gaza, because it is an attack on the working class and the institutions of the working class. And when you organize around the principles against settler colonialism and against nationalist Zionism, you are organizing and opening the door for the greater organization and demand for state power, frankly, of the working class. So I see them attached. And I see that the one good thing that I can say is I think that Israel is terrified. I think they are wounded. I think the opinion of the world community is very much in opposition to them, if not the governments necessarily, certainly the people from Denmark and the Netherlands to, of course, to India, to Yemen, to Egypt, to places like Germany, where it's even considered illegal to be protesting. There are people that have come out, to Great Britain, and a whole additional generation of Jews, amongst others, in the United States who are fighting back, and unions. that will still continue to put forth these resolutions or take actions like the very heroic and courageous ILW, I was going to say the ILWGWU. I used to be part of that union, the garment workers, but the ILWU, the dock workers, the longshoremen. It's the opinion and the politics are changing demonstratively. And the AFL-CIO is a shell. And it's partly a shell because it's capitulated to no matter who its membership are or what its coffers look like and what damage it can do in terms of public policy statements when used by the ruling elite. But it is a shell of an organization that perhaps should be thoroughly dismantled, because the ability for it to reform and truly represent the interests of the laborers of this country is in serious question.
And of course, the great fear that the trade union bureaucracy has is that this mass movement that's developing. I know San Francisco healthcare workers for Palestine, the journalist union, my union, had a meeting of members, over 100 members, went to an executive committee meeting to demand that they support a ceasefire, unheard of for the journalist union. And of course, the campaign to say that journalists should not take a stand. They should be objective and not take a political stand is the ideology really of the bosses, that workers shouldn't take a stand on political issues. But I think that there is a fear in the case of the healthcare workers for Palestine, of workers from all unions coming together and organizing politically for the right of the Palestinians, that this will expand to question not only the right of the Palestinians, but why we have an undemocratic labor movement, why the unions themselves aren't educating the working class about these issues, which should be a necessity since this is the issue facing the working class. It seems that the trading bureaucracy is terrified that workers start joining together and really challenging not only the failure to support the right of the Palestinians, but also the whole structure of the labor movement.
Well, with the organizing that's going on with the Starbucks Workers Union, with the Amazon Workers Union, with this whole new aggressive entity where we were told that you can't organize these small sites, these individual sites, for among other things. With the and I would include in that is also the formations of workers' centers, of immigrants that are organizing across the country, from day laborers and farm workers, all of whom have a radical sentiment and a different construct and understanding than the most immediate one, different than the 30s, or maybe I should say similar to the 30s, different than what has happened in organized labor in the last years. And I think some of that has that kind of organizing and the efforts by groups like Teamsters for a Democratic Union, which broke the back of really the kind of hierarchical entities of the unions to begin to get what we absolutely had to have in any event, which is union democracy, where the workers were the formative part of the decision-making of their unions. I think that the coming together of this, just like the fear that Israel has of the organization, yes, the AFL-CIO should be frightened. Either get on board with the new energies and the new politics and take up the interests as they see it of the working class and the issues that of their oppression, which are stimulated by the capitalist system. Absolutely. And the quest for workers to assume the authority over their own lives. If the AFL-CIO can't get on this, well, and I'm dubious that they can be reformed, then it's time for another labor organization. And I think that we have a real shot in the arm now, a real energy because people are taking up these issues. And many of us go back to and remember, again, the longshore workers' actions, and they're stopping the boats. And that goes back to during apartheid, when they refused to unload ships from South Africa and the like. And indeed, in South Africa, looking at the examples of the unions there, from the Durban strikers during apartheid to now groups like NUMSA, the incredible union of metal workers, the largest union in South Africa, 350,000 members strong at least, who have taken up the political issues because they are a strategic and imperative part of our rights as human beings, and they are human rights. And we have to, of course, begin to, and the unions that are organizing today, largely amongst young people, and very often people of color, have a different kind of politic. They understand labor organizing as a political unit and not merely to, again, for economic benefit detached from the full political need and identity of the human being, so much of whom are people of color and poor people who are oppressed in other aspects of their life as well as economically. And I hate to say it, but I'll say it. I think that's something that Bernie Sanders never understood, and why people like Bernie Sanders can't support a ceasefire now, because they never understood what is the fundamental part of all of this, and that is the struggle against racism, the struggle against Islamophobia. All of these things are a strategic part of the resolutions that are in the formation and the kind of organizing that is going on now to treat the full human being with all of their needs. And that means to understand the intersectionality, the absolute inability to bifurcate the issues of race and class. And I think the unions that are forming today and the workers' centers have a real understanding of that. And we are in upsurge, not without pain. Things will get worse before they get better, but there have been some enormous and encouraging activity going on. And I think that's why the state fights so hard. And the AFL-CIO is fighting for its own individual privilege as a labor bureaucracy that has capitulated to the plutocrats.
And of course, that raises the issue of the Democratic Party and the failure of the unions in the United States to have their own independent working class party, because the unions are embedded in the Democratic Party. They give money, they campaign for the Democratic Party, and they believe in telling workers that the Democratic Party is going to fight fascism in the United States, that we can rely on the Democratic Party to defend us against the rise of fascism. And that danger is growing because the political crisis, the support by billionaires to a dictatorship in the United States, to a new kind of regime, is a real threat to the working class in the United States and all over the world. And it seems that the fight for the political independence of the working class, it has to be tied to the fight for the Palestinians and for all working people, for that matter. The Democratic Party, like the AFL-CIO leadership, is a stalwart for continued support, military aid to Israel, and opposition to a ceasefire, even a ceasefire in Israel. The Democratic Party can't even mention the word Biden, a ceasefire. So I think it shows again that this working class movement that is resuscitating in the United States has to also raise the question of the relationship of the unions to the Democratic Party.
You said it all. I concur. It's one of the reasons that I brought up, even though he is an independent, Bernie Sanders, because of the absolute opportunism or unreliability or the fact that the party, under any circumstances, whether you're an independent and you're in the democratic process or in the Congress at this juncture, you are not a reliable force. I think you exhaust the limits of the possible when you're in struggle, and you appeal to and you try to push, whether it's the Cori Bushes, whether it's the AOCs, whether it's the squads. You fight like hell against the censorship of courageous women. The only Palestinian person in Congress, Rashida Tlaib, who had the courage to say, which is one of the most democratic and beautiful statements to appeal for, from the river to the sea. Yes, Palestine must be free, absolutely and unequivocally. It's a statement of affirmation. It's a statement of love. It's a station of creation and inclusion. And the woman gets censored. Where the hell were the Bernie Sanders having press conferences? Where were they? So the Democratic Party has proven itself to be hopelessly bankrupt. I do not say that you do not appeal to its more liberal factions or appeal to it, but I absolutely know that we are due and overdue for the formation of a working class party to ally between the workers' movement and the various oppressed nationalities, and to more fervently deal with the issue of race and all the rest. It's imperative. And I have to say that whether it's the Jill Steins or the Cornel West and stuff, hey, you want to do it, it's not about during the election season. We have to begin the process now, not for the current election, but for the next election, to really form the base of this. And I decidedly hope that it does not look like democratic socialism, but that it really tackles the issues of being a fervently and aggressively anti-capitalist vehicle with a decidedly socialist sensitivity, which it can openly and pronouncedly acknowledge and deal with, and explain what that concept means to, and embed that in the desires and the hopes and the aspirations and the needs of working people in their own lives, so that they join it. And because a better world is possible when we are empowered, but we're the ones to make that happen.
Okay, well, I want to thank you very much for joining us. We've been talking with Mime Rosenberg. She's a programmer on Pacifica, Labor at the Crossroads, longtime activist, fighter, and attorney, and a member of UAW 2325, the Association of Legal Aid Attorneys, talking about the attack by the government, the federal government, to ban them from discussing and debating the issue of Palestine and what that means not only for her union, but for all working people in the United States. So thanks for joining us.
Right. And when we take power, that also means a serious restructuring of the court system as part of this process.
How about a workers' court instead of a capitalist court?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely, and reparatory justice as the guiding principle. And by the way, the program is Building Bridges, and the other one is Equal Rights and Justice. But thank you, Steve, and thank you for your incredible commitment and instruction over so many years on behalf of working people and the fight for social justice, equal rights and justice, and really towards a truly democratic society, its realization. So thank you for all you do.